Tale of the Silent Woman. There once was a woman who lived by the sea. Each day she caught fish to sell at the market. And each night she spent with her family beside the fire in their little cottage. One night, when the moon was dark, she went for a walk along the seashore. The wind carried the sound of strange voices singing. She asked aloud, "Where can these voices be coming from?" In that moment, the wind tore the cloak from her back and the voice from her mouth. When she returned home, she was unable to speak. Many moons passed, and still her voice did not return. She became known in the village as the Silent Woman. One day, while the woman was out in her fishing boat, she caught a fish that spoke to her and said, "If you promise to throw me back into the sea, I will tell you where you can find your voice." She was amazed that the fish had spoken to her, but she did not hesitate to agree. And so the fish told her what had become of her voice and how she might retrieve it. "Your voice was stolen by the north wind. He roams the world, unable to rest, and he carries a great sack on his back, filled with voices such as yours. When he grows weary, he opens up the sack and commands that the voices sing him a lullaby. But still, he is unable to sleep, and so he continues to fill his sack until he succeeds. There is a stone of silence at the bottom of the sea that would allow the wind to rest. If you can find it and give it to the north wind, you might be able to win your voice back." The woman gave the kiss of thanks from her heart because she could not say so in words. Then she let go of the fish and watched as he swam away. She returned to shore and began to make her preparations. She had heard that there was an old woman of the mountains who knew the secret of breathing underwater. She set off towards the mountains to find her and to learn this secret. Before long, she had eaten the last of the food in her pack. She foraged for berries and leaves and made broth from twigs. At night, she was bitterly cold and feared she would neither find the woman nor retrace her steps back home. Just when she felt most alone and was about to give up, an owl began to follow her wherever she went. The woman was so happy to have company, she shared her berries and leaves with the owl. On the night of the full moon, the owl transformed into an old woman with silver white hair that reached all the way to the ground. "You have been courageous to come so far in search of me," she said. "You have been kind to share all you had when you had nothing, and so I will help you. But there is something I will ask in return. Inside this bottle is the breath of life. It will keep you alive underwater for 3 days and 3 nights. You must bring me a message from the Queen of the Sea, for it is a long time since we have seen each other." As dawn approached, the owl took to the sky, and the woman turned her steps towards the sea, the bottle carefully wrapped inside her bag. After a long time or a short time, the woman arrived at the edge of the sea. She took a breath from the bottle and then dived into the water. Down, down, down she went. Deeper and deeper she sank, until at last she reached the bottom of the sea. She walked for miles along the ocean floor until she came to a magnificent city. The city was filled with incredible beings who were half human, half fish. They were all very interested in the bottle that the woman wore around her neck. One of the sea people tried to grab the bottle, while another tried to defend her. Before she knew it, she was in the middle of a fight. The city guard came to break up the fight. They confiscated the bottle and put the woman in jail. She did not know how she would survive without the breath of life. The guard told her that the breath of life was outlawed in their city because it enabled sea people to cross over into the human realm. She tried to communicate to him that she would soon need another breath from the bottle or she would die. But without her voice, he was unable to understand what she was saying. She was brought before the Queen of the Sea and placed on trial for her actions, but she was unable to reply to the Queen's questions or even to say she had been helped by the Queen's old friend, the Owl Woman. And so she danced her story. She showed her voice as it flew from her mouth. She showed the talking fish and her journey into the mountains. She showed Owl Woman and her dive into the sea, until at last the Queen of the Sea understood. But it was too late. The breath of life that the woman had taken from the bottle had finally run out. She fell to the ocean floor, lifeless. The Queen called her physicians, but they could not revive her. When she woke, it was dark, and she found herself no longer underwater. The air smelled of smoke. She could see a fire burning in the distance, and began to make her way towards it. A very old man stood watching the fire. He said, "Welcome to the land of the dead. You must offer something to the flames if you wish to pass." But she did not want to enter the land of the dead, and she had nothing to offer the flames. So she stayed and watched the fire with the old man. She saw many people arriving. They made their offerings and moved on, but no one emerged from the direction of the land of the dead, until a woman walked out of the darkness and made her way towards the fire. She approached the woman and said, "I never imagined that I would look again upon your face, my child. It makes my heart glad, and yet I grieve to see you at the borders of such a place as this." It had been many long years since the silent woman had seen her mother. Her mother offered the old man a golden coin and said, "This is not yet the time for my child to dwell in this place. Accept this coin so that she may stay with me a short while, for there are things I must pass on to her. I will return her to these borders before the fire grows dim." Together, mother and daughter entered the land of the dead. They walked through the darkness, and then they walked some more. They came to another fire. surrounded by ancient women. Her mother said, "These are your grandmothers and great-grandmothers, going back and back for many generations. We welcome you, daughter, to sit by our fire." The silent woman joined the circle of grandmothers, and they told her of their loves and their losses, of times of war and times of peace, of their hopes and dreams, the children who lived and those taken too soon, of forbidden desires. They spoke their secret names. Some of them did not speak at all, for their voices had been stolen years ago by the raging north wind. The grandmothers sang to her, and as they sang, they decorated her face with markings like their own. They placed a necklace of bones around her neck. They placed ashes from the fire upon her tongue and whispered secret words in her ear. And then they sang some more. The silent woman felt a sound rumbling within her. It was the whisper of ash and the force of bone. It was the depth of the darkness and the love of all her grandmother's singing. The sound was like a seed in her throat. The fires were growing dim. It was time to return, to say farewell. "We will always be with you, especially when you need us most," said the grandmothers. When they arrived back at the borders of the land of the dead, the old man had grown older and the fire was nearly out. It was time to say goodbye. At the bottom of the sea, the silent woman returned to life, much to the Queen's surprise. The Queen apologized for her rough treatment, and before the whole city presented her with a crown of seashells. Because she had journeyed to the land of the dead and returned, she no longer needed the breath of life to survive underwater. She was revered by the sea people, who sang a song of the deep sea in her honor. She felt a sound murmuring within her. It was the rush of watery currents and the force of waves. It was the depth of the ocean and the lightness of raindrops. The Queen gave the silent woman a bottle, but this time, instead of the breath of life, it contained a message for the owl woman. "She is my sister," said the Queen. "Our lives have taken different paths, but I miss her so. You must promise to deliver this message before you face the north wind." The sea people were afraid of the stone of silence, but the guard to her cell insisted on coming with her to find it. "I did not help you when you needed it, and so I will help you now." According to legend, the stone of silence was to be found in a cave at the deepest point of the ocean. The guard, whose name was Lamb, had an old map which showed how to get there. They journeyed deeper and deeper into the ocean. As they drew closer to the cave, everything became very still. The currents stopped moving. No fish swam past. Their legs grew heavy and Lamb could barely lift his arm. The power of the stone of silence was so strong. As they drew closer to the cave, it was almost impossible to move. Inside the cave, a monk sat beside the stone in perfect stillness. He was almost like a stone himself. They could not take another step, and so they sat and became as silent and still as stone. They sat in stillness for a long time, and as they sat, the stone became smaller and smaller. With a shaky and croaky voice, the monk began to speak. "I have guarded this stone for 1,000 years, waiting for the day when one would come who is able to carry the stone. The day has arrived, and now the stone is yours to carry." The monk placed the stone in the silent woman's hand, Then he crumbled into dust and ash. Even though the monk's body was gone, they could feel his spirit close by. They thanked him for guarding the stone for such a vast expanse of time. The time had come to say goodbye. "You have been a true friend," said Lamb. "I have learned a great deal on this journey with you." The silent woman bowed her head in thanks for his courage and willingness to go into the unknown. Up, up, up she went. It felt good to be on dry land once again, but the silent woman's journey was far from over. First, she must keep the promise she had made to the Queen of the Sea. She made her way into the mountains in search of the Owl Woman. The walk was long and arduous, but the search for the Owl Woman was short. The wise old bird sought her out, eager for news from her sister. The silent woman gave her the bottle, which contained the message from the Queen of the Sea. When the Owl Woman removed the cork from the bottle, a beautiful song rose into the air. It was a song about the depth of the ocean and the soaring height of the mountain. It was a song whose notes soared and dived, swam and flew. It was filled with pearl and shell, feather and bone. The silent woman felt a sound in her throat, soft as air, as if a bird's gentle wings were fluttering inside her. It was a sound filled with love, the deep bond between sisters and between true friends. The Owl Woman was so grateful to receive her sister's message. She gave the silent woman a cape of feathers and a special pouch for the stone of silence she could wear tied around her waist. "I will carry you on my back towards the north wind," she said. They flew over the mountains towards the frozen lands, towards the home of the north wind. Once they had entered the frozen lands, the wind blew so ferociously it almost pushed them down from the sky, and the stone of silence began to grow heavier and heavier. As they drew closer to the home of the north wind, it became impossible to fly. The wind was ferocious, and the stone was too heavy. Even as they continued on foot, the silent woman struggled to stand upright and bear its weight. By the time they reached the North Wind's castle, the silent woman could hardly walk. The stone had become so heavy. They found the North Wind in his throne room, screaming at the voices in his sack, commanding them to sing for him so that he could finally get some sleep after long years of roaming the earth. The silent woman trembled, for she knew her voice was in that sack. The North Wind raged at his uninvited guests. Without wasting another moment, the silent woman took out the stone. It took all her strength to hold it. He was entranced by the stone and became quite still. He said, "I want this. I must have this. Give it to me and I will return your voice to you." The silent woman had waited so long to reach this moment, and yet, now that it had arrived, she could never be content to free her voice alone. She said, "I will only give you this stone if you release them all." The North Wind raged. "Who are you to ask this of me? Who are you? Now you will have none. I will blow you away forever." The wind blew so fiercely, the silent woman lost her grip of the heavy stone. It fell from her hands and cracked in two. In that moment, the silent woman realized it was her own voice that had spoken when she had asked for all the voices to be released. She did not know if her voice had uttered the words from her own mouth, or from inside the sack, but her throat felt warm. She could feel the sound that had been slowly growing within her, ready to emerge. She let out a great roar. And as she roared, the trapped voices began to escape from the sack. The north wind became afraid. He tried to shut the opening of the sack, but he couldn't stop the voices from rising into the air. The roar became a song, the song the grandmothers had sung to her in the land of the dead. All the freed voices joined in. The necklace of bones her grandmothers had given her began to rattle. And then her mother was beside her, and her grandmothers all around her. They sang together, and their voices were beautiful and strong. The north wind fell into a deep sleep. The grandmothers placed him gently in the sack. "We will take him with us to the land of the dead," they said. "There he can rest until he is ready to return." This is why the air in the north was still for many years. The grandmothers made their farewells. "We will always be close to you when you need us most." And then they were gone. The owl woman carried her back to the shores of her village. "Thank you, my dear friend," said the woman who was no longer silent. The owl woman replied, "Come and find me in the high places once again, and I will tell you my story." Off she flew towards the mountains. It was such a joy to be reunited with her family once again, such a joy to return home. She became known as the Story Woman, her voice carrying the earth, air, fire and water of this world and other worlds too.